Hello, I'm Gail Christopher, one of the co-developers of the Americans All Education Program. It's a national set of resources to help our nation's educators deal effectively with the concepts of diversity and democracy in the classroom. We're gathered today to talk about the use of the Americans All educational resources in the classroom, to hear from teachers, from educators, and from students about how these resources are effective and how they might also be improved. And as we begin this conversation, I'm going to invite our guests here in the studio to introduce yourselves and to tell us why you care about these issues of diversity and democracy. Why are you passionate about these?
My name is Linda Hubler, and I've been in the Wichita Public School System for about 26 years now. Started out at South High in the 70s as an English teacher. And for the last 3 years, I've been a peer consultant in the district working with first-year teachers. And I guess my passion about diversity has to do with the fact that we do not live in isolation. And as I see the population changing, we can no longer just look at how we view issues and situations. We need to take a more global look at what's happening.
My name is Cynthia Vieira, and I teach fourth grade at Bryan Elementary currently. I've been in this district for 8 years. I've worked in a school where a lot of my students come from other countries and have to face those issues currently, not as in migrating over from the country hundreds of years ago, but they face these issues currently. This year, I am at a school where those issues don't exist for the most part. It's a totally different situation where they don't see that direct effect that it has for people to come over. So being in the two different situations, it's very important for the people that have come here and migrated to this country to understand the importances and why they've done that, and to hold on to their culture and their values. Important for me as well to understand that and hold on to my culture and values, and to get those that don't have that direct effect to understand and see what others have to go through themselves.
My name is Denise Nickens Randall. I teach at Robinson Middle School. I've been in the district 21 years, and I think my career began with teaching in a minority situation in Midtown Wichita, where students needed something to help them identify with history and know that there were role models like themselves who were involved in history. So I am very passionate about the Americans All.
My name is Anjali Chandra. I'm a SAP member at East High. SAP is Students Against Prejudice. And over the past years, I've seen that diversity is a major component in the way I learn. That by learning other perspectives from the international point of view, I see things in a more universal way and understand it more clearly.
Thank you.
I'm John Lefebvre, and I currently work for the National Council on Economic Education. Previously, I was a social studies consultant for the state of Nebraska, and I also have the privilege of being a board member with the People of America Foundation. I'm a teacher, and that's, I think, the important part of what we all are. I think we teach two things. I think we teach who we are and what we know. And I really feel that diversity needs to be a part of what we know. As we begin to prepare students to become participating citizens in our community today, they need to be able to look at all of the situations, and that's where the diversity enters into that whole process. I'd like us to think about two things. I think that knowledge without passion is sterile. Passion without knowledge is dangerous.
My name is Leela Pratt, and I teach at Marshall Middle School. I've been a teacher for, I can't remember, between 25 and 27 years. I'm a first-generation American. My mother is from India, and I understand how some of my students feel. I teach in a school that's predominantly minority students, how they feel, how they are accepted, what is important in their lives, and how are they expected to learn without knowing their backgrounds and the importance of their backgrounds, that they are significant members of society. And I find that if I can't teach them the significance of their background, how are they to learn about anybody else's?
I'm Alan Cullen, the founder of the People of America Foundation and a co-director with Gail of the Americans All program.
We hear from?
My name is Margaret Hoy, and I teach world history at Mayberry of Cultural Fine Arts, and this is my 28th year of teaching. I taught kindergarten for 25 years, and now I've moved up and started teaching 6th grade. And I know that teaching students, they come from all nationalities, all backgrounds, and me, myself, I'm full of multicultural myself. Just by looking at me, you can tell that I'm from all different nationalities. And it's so important that we teach our students about their nationalities, where they originated from. And it does take a village to raise a student. Everybody in the community has to help to raise our students today.
Thank you.
I'm Bilal Farhat, and I'm an East High student who is also in Students Against Prejudice. As an Arab American, I've been brought up through the school systems here, so I've been brought up with that perspective, as well as the perspective from my dad, who is Syrian. And so I feel like honored, I guess you could say, that I have two perspectives to look on, so I can make my own decisions based on two different areas, or two different perspectives on like certain issues. And so basically, diversity is important to me because I want everyone else to have the same opportunity that I have. So through like Americans All, they can have the access to multiple perspectives on certain issues and have an overall understanding of an international perspective.
Hi, I'm Becky Rakunas. I teach at Riverside Cultural Arts and History Magnet. I went to this school because I am very interested in our different cultures. My grandmother was from Sweden, and growing up I always wondered, I asked my father, well, teach me something Swedish, or what do you know about our background, our culture? And because we were different, or because my family perceived that as being different, it was put in the background, and none of that rich culture was passed on. And I always was very curious, and I guess kind of disappointed that I didn't know more. When I first began teaching, I was in special ed, and I've enjoyed many years of teaching in that field, but it broadened my perspective of differences in culture. And from that, I think I've developed the perspective of developing respect, and that's my focus. I think that we respect other people and learn from others as we understand the culture we come from.
I'm Paul Oberg. I was in charge of the district's museum programs for 14 years. And my earliest passion and memories of cross-cultural experiences came from my father, who was a minister, and we had exchanges of ministers from various countries, Kenya, Lesotho, Malaysia, and they brought me gifts and wore their traditional costumes at that time, their garb. That made an impression on me at a very early age. We adopted, I have a black sister, youngest sister, and we hosted a black student from inner city Chicago for a year or two so he could graduate in Minnesota in a small town and go into college with a little bit better degree. It's my first having the FBI knock on the door to investigate our family at that time was an experience I won't forget. I realized the political importance of what we were doing. Went to the University of Minnesota and gained additional cross-cultural experiences with a Living Learning Center, as it was called, and a program called ADAPT, which was appreciating differences among people and things. And got into the classroom and did pretty much what I did for 14 years in the school district here in presenting cross-cultural programs to students in the classroom. Became an anthropologist as far as that's concerned in the University of Minnesota there. Joined Peace Corps, spent 2 years in Costa Rica and a year in El Salvador. My primary purpose at that time was to have a cross-cultural experience, which if you immerse yourself in another culture, you will have, regardless. So I met that goal. And then to aprender a hablar español también. And so I learned to speak Spanish as well. All of these things have combined to make the importance of cross-cultural perspectives, culture context, situations, acculturation, assimilation, all of those things need to be understood. And these multiple perspectives that I've heard all of you mention are those that need to be set out front where everyone can comprehend what's going on.
Thank you.
My name is Patrick Cooks. I attend Wichita East High, and I'm in a club called Students Against Prejudice. Students Against Prejudice is a club where they promote cultural diversity and awareness. I joined it my sophomore year, which is also the same year it started. I didn't realize how much of my life is so diverse and how my family is diverse and what neighborhood I grew up in. And I didn't realize that until I joined the club and attended Wichita East High.
I'm Leonard Wesley. My age puts me way back where things were segregated and unequal. I learned that as an early child that people treated me differently. I think because of my skin color and the texture of my hair. That always concerned me. During the summer, we played baseball, and we played as in a small town where all the ball players came into a league. And we got along playing baseball. The little white ball caused us to focus on it rather than on individuals. But as soon as the school bell rang, we went back to separate, unequal schools. That haunted me, that made me feel like, gee, there's something must be wrong with what we're doing in our society, that we in the summer can play together around a little white ball and get along. And yet when we go back to our barrios and our ghettos, we are segregated. So I said in my mind that I'm going to do something about that as I grew older. And so when I begun teaching, my efforts were to bring the children of all the people together. And so I see my passion for inclusiveness. It takes all of us to make this world work. If we don't put our heads together to create harmony and unity, we'll probably self-destruct.
Thank you all for sharing your passion, your experiences. We started this program, I believe it's 20 years ago, and it seemed relevant and important to us then. We believe it's probably more relevant and more critical today. And I wondered if, as educators, you could speak to its importance today, given the set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. A nation at war, a nation struggling with the issues of diversity and the globalization. Could you talk to us about how relevant you think these resources are in today's climate, and speak to your experiences in the classroom around that?
Well, at Marshall Middle School, as with many schools in the Wichita District, you have gang activities going on. Many of my students have come from different countries. Their acceptance and what they find to be accepted in society sometimes does not come from family, doesn't come from support systems that we would consider acceptable or even positive influences in their lives. And so they find other things to occupy their time to make themselves feel valid. The reason they don't feel valid is because something has gone terribly wrong in society. And in order for me to make sure these students can succeed and go on with their lives in a positive manner is not to make them just feel good about themselves, is to educate them. If I haven't educated them, but I've given them a good hug that day, I haven't done a whole lot. And with Americans All materials, you have factual information. I don't always find that to be the case with textbooks. And with the Americans All materials, you have books that come from 5 different perspectives, at least, with factual information through many years of history, through many years of research. And when I teach a history lesson or a literature lesson, I can use those materials to show my students, to point out to my students the significance of things that have happened in history, the importance of their culture, how that has progressed the United States or whatever country they are from. But they're in the United States now, and to be accepted and a productive member of society, this curriculum does nothing but promote that. It shows the significance that they have in society, what they can produce in society, and that it doesn't always have to be in these other areas. You don't always have to make your money in these other areas. there are ways to make money, and there are things in your life that are significant and positive, and that through education you can succeed with some of these things.
Thank you very much. An interesting response in terms of the problem of street violence and gang involvement, and you seeing Americans All as a resource to help you deal with that. That's very insightful. Did you want to respond? Anyone on this side? Anyone else? Yes.
I teach at Robinson Middle School, and the program that I teach in is the pre-IB program. And in that classroom, you have a diverse classroom. But when you stand in front as an educator and you're teaching about the American immigration and the movement westward, you see students who slink back in their seats. But yet when you use the Americans All program materials, you start to show that, well, the Asian group participated just as much as those that came from Europe. And then you see them sit a little taller in their seat, and they say, this is something I can relate to. You know, she's talking about my group of people, where they came from. And to see that light come on in their eyes and see them sit up a little bit straighter and say, hey, yeah, we did something too, is worth using the program and helping them to understand that I'm represented, I'm part of the culture, and we don't have to take a back seat. And I'm very much for using those materials.
Thank you. Anybody from this side? Any teachers dealing with today's reality? One of the realities today is the Leave No Child Behind legislation. In addition to the societal issues we talked about, you as teachers are faced with a whole new paradigm in terms of accountability. Could you speak to the applicability of these resources in that context as well? Anybody?
My first day of school, what I like to do with the students, I try and make the student feel so comfortable in my classroom, because a sixth grader is something completely new. Oh my, it's like really a kindergartner the first day. They're scared. They can't get that locker open. They don't know how to get to their class. And those frustrations, I try and bring humor into the classroom. And so what I do, when I introduce myself, I tell them my name, and with the name having Hoi, they really don't know, is this a black Vietnamese woman? You know, they just don't know. So to bring humor in my class, what I do, I tell them that I have Native American Indian blood in me. And the Native American Indian students kind of sit up in their seat, like Mrs. Randall said. And I tell them that I have also Hispanic blood in my running through my veins. And I also tell them that I have Afro-American, and you see the students sit up in their seats. And I also tell them I have European-American, and those European-Americans sit up in their seats. And then to break the ice, I tell them, now, I don't want any of you talk about Vietnamese students either. And they kind of look at me, and I said, because I eat Vietnamese food, and food turns into blood, and it's running through my veins.
Oh, that's cute.
That's how I introduce American All. Visual aids. I have American Alls up in my classroom, and I every day are touching each and every student, each and every culture, and I tell them and reassure them that I am there for you. I have your back at all times because I represent all cultures.
Yes, thank you. That's powerful.
I think one of the things that teachers are really struggling with, like you said, is the No Child Left Behind standards set by the state or their school district. And I guess from my perspective, what I'm seeing then is that textbook becomes a resource as well. And the Americans All fit so well to supplement that information, because the textbooks, for the most part, give a pretty generic, especially in the history level, I think, version, often from the perspective of the victor, and often in isolation. So one of the things that we found in the high school area was the connectedness and the fact that the Americans All program had those wonderful timelines that helped them put everything in perspective, so that when you were talking about the civil rights movement of the 60s, it wasn't just an African American thing. It also involved Hispanics and the Chinese and Asian cultures as well, so that they could understand that when we talked about civil rights movement, it was an everybody movement, and that, you know, even women went through some of that. So they get sometimes, I think, in the textbook that theory in isolation, and the Americans all through their visuals and their timelines really supplied us with the information that was high student interest, like these ladies said earlier. Students sit up in their chair, they take a more interest in it because it's very personal for them. Then it becomes me, I was a part of this, or my parents were a part of this. Some of them were very shocked to find that they had relatives that were involved in some of that, but they never talked about it at home. And so it gave them an outlet for doing that.
You mentioned a key point in terms of the home, and I wondered if, as you respond, some of you might speak to how you engage the community or the family through some of the activities, because it does take a village. We've heard that over and over again today, and we've tried to design some of the resources to engage the community and family. So in addition to the earlier question, I've added another one, so yes.
Well, I wanted to go along with what you were saying, Linda. The time involved in putting our plans together to present lessons is very taxing, and we think, oh, another thing to do, how are we going to make this work? So what I have found with the Americans All is that it enriches what I do. The example that I was going to use that goes along with your question, at the beginning of the school year, we had our children bring in information about their families. And since I'm at the elementary level, for many of them it's a new revelation to find out that they haven't always been here, that their families came from other countries. And in the past, we enjoyed that and expanded on it. But after being exposed to the Americans All program, I had more information to show how, even though we came from different places to arrive here, here's the journey that these people took. And what we discovered last year was that for most people it was very difficult to become an American. And I think from our study we had a new appreciation of the common ties we have and the things that were different about our past.
Yes, did you want to respond? No, okay. I'd like somebody to talk about how you sort of adapt these materials and make them your own. We see them as a catalyst, really, a framework, but we're always amazed at how teachers just sort of go from there, and create their own ways of using these materials. Have you got some secrets you might want to share with other teachers in terms of things you've done?
I don't think you need any secrets. Gail, when you trained me, it was way back. And at that time, I remember being in a room with elementary and middle school teachers. There were no other high school teachers in your training, and most of the materials were not really geared toward our high school students. We didn't have any trouble just taking it and using it, like I said, as a resource. It fits very well with the text. It's very user-friendly. And a lot of times we found ourselves just handing some of those some of the timeline books and some of the resources that were really teacher-oriented to the students so that they could do kind of their own research. Of course, this was back before the internet was quite so popular, but they had a lot of fun just discovering through those resources on their own, so I don't think it's any trouble at all for teachers. The pictures are wonderful. And just putting those up for a bulletin board display or having them up when you're starting a new unit is so high interest, and again makes it so personal for students.
I think particularly with the photographic collection, that you can just pick out what you need for the particular subject matter, and you post those, and then you use them for a while, and you're able to bring in a different perspective with the timelines. You're able to coordinate a lot of groups together that you probably wouldn't think, well, what's happening at this year in the Native American history, or what's happening in the Asian American history, and it allows a lot of overlap, and realize that we're just not in an isolated world.
Sometimes we've heard feedback that because the focus is history, it's not relevant to today. And I'd love to hear how you deal with that issue in terms of finding today's relevance in a historic perspective.
One of the things I use the photographs quite a bit. Many of the standards that we have, and I'm teaching literature this year, research, expository narrative writing. persuasive writing. Big impact on that, big emphasis on that. I used the photographs, but at the very beginning of the year, I worked on character education, which was also part of our standards. And I dealt with my students, especially 8th grade, coming in, and I'd had these students 2 years previous as 6th graders. We made games for conflict resolution, and we used the photographs, and the students were to look at the photographs and find out what was the conflict in this. They weren't allowed to read what was happening on the back. Some of the photographs have a short bio vignette on the back, and the students were to look at that, and they had to do it by themselves, and then they had to do it in a group, and they had to share what they felt could be the conflict. And some of the photographs, it can just be one person. It can be a group of people. It can be the students lined up in front of the school, the Native American students. See, we can all think of the pictures in our heads. And the students have to see what the conflicts are. How then can they relate those conflicts to what they're experiencing now? What is happening to them on the street? What is happening to them in school? What is happening to them at home? And how are these conflicts similar? How are they different? How can you write about this persuasively? How can you convince me that these students maybe shouldn't have been taken from their home? How can you write about your experiences? It's very easy to transfer the knowledge from those things onto what we're doing now. And the research is just incredible. The research materials make it very user-friendly for my students as well as myself.
Having the same resources, the same images in all of your minds, you mentioned that about the photographs, is really 90% of the problem. To be able to use a common experience, common images, for example, that you have to analyze and observe what you can from the photographs, provides you with the same kinds of tools from a museum perspective in using artifacts and materials that were both developed by past generations to compare to the present day. Some of the connections you can make with the present day with African materials are manifold. I play folk songs, which is again of the common man, things that have been handed down through generations, through oral tradition. That is primary source material, and the stories behind those are very personal stories, and they show the individual and the common experiences that people have in cross-cultural situations. The banjo that I play was derived from a West African instrument. The idea of it had to be brought over by original slaves. They could not bring the banjo themselves because they could bring nothing. The examples of hair picks that are used today, plastic ones, originated in Africa, and you can still find them produced there by hand of that type. So there are connections that can be made with historical materials, but also present-day materials and artifacts that can help to bring to life a lot of these photographs and the cultural connections that we all have.
We were really emphasizing diversity as well as democracy when the program was created, and we felt that by pushing this sense of inclusion, we were helping to contribute to a healthier democratic society. We honestly are concerned now with many of the social indicators that we are taking democracy for granted, and we're not really teaching civics and engagement in terms of the democratic process. Could you speak to your experiences with the resources in terms of encouraging students to become civically engaged?
As I visited a number of schools with this program, I'm amazed that there's a great deal of community service being focused upon. I think you can even get credit in your classes for doing community service. To me, to be involved and to understand how we tick as a society, and the more you know about how to get into your community and help your fellow man, is noble and is civic. So I see that happening. Youngsters, I have a granddaughter who just started preschool, and she had a trip to the fire department just the other day, and she was so excited about all the people that create safety for us. And then the police come in, and she's grasping that at an early age, that to know about your community and be able to interact within that community and you do something to make your community better is really what we're trying to talk about. Is to be civic is to give something, and to make civilization function more readily and more safely.
I agree, and I think our community so many times is more than what our students see on a day-to-day basis. That it's broader, and I think that's where the diversity piece comes in. As I taught American government class and American government in the classroom, I mean, the goal, as I said earlier, was to have them to become participating citizens. But what are they participating in, and who is that participation impacting? And I think that that's where this curriculum really opens up that door and opens up the eyes, which is important, because then they're participating students walking away with that knowledge and the skills and the attitudes to make those good decisions.
I'm going to ask the students to weigh in on this question too, when you feel like it, as far as what this inclusion conversation does to help you appreciate your role in a democracy. And I'll give you a minute to think about it. While you're doing that, I would like to ask, what I experienced when I was facilitating the training was that there were moments that were just precious. You know, when a teacher discovered something they didn't know before or gained a sense of confidence. And I imagine, in your experience, there are just those special moments when students just sort of have that aha, you know, that stay with you. Could you share some of those stories with us if you can? I think that would be very useful to other teachers when you've seen a light come on or something transformative happen in the lives of a student, or for that matter, even in your own role as a teacher.
Let me share this. We were in Atlanta, and I have a niece that has the Americans All Materials. They had done a unit on contributions that African Americans had made. And one little boy who comes from a very poor background, after the unit was completed, he came up to my niece and said, "You know, I knew we had done something right in this country." He had learned about J. Manselinger. He learned about that we invented a lot of things that we enjoy as a society, the blood, plasma, all that. He was so elated that I guess in his life he thought that he was not successful as a being, and came to her and said, "You know, I know we've done something right." And so when children see themselves in history and evolving around a concept that they can embrace, then they support it. But if you live in a glass house and you aren't seeing yourself within that house, you tend to throw rocks at it. And we know what glass houses will do when a rock is cast upon it.
Anyone else?
Actually, I was thinking that I grew up in a community for about 10 years that didn't have much of a diverse culture. When I moved to Wichita, I saw diversity. I had friends from more than over 10 different cultures. And it does help when you think about America. You realize that, yes, it's a country of numerous different cultures and people. And there are activities, especially at school, like Student Congress and other activities, where you get involved with the community and you can understand how democracy works while learning about other cultures. And so while we pass on, we have the framers of the Constitution with their set in stone, but it changes to match the diverse marks and what we create with our culture. So it's an ever-going and changing place.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just like to add on to what she said, there are certain classes or events or activities like debate and forensics that expose you more to like international issues, like multiple perspectives. So that's always good. But as far as like in the classroom goes, for example, I can think of my freshman year when I took world history, and like the part specifically on the Islamic chapter wasn't all. It had a few things that were like inaccurate like historically, and so like what we had to do, we like provided my teacher with like supplements that he had to teach to the class, so that I guess the real message you could say was like brought out. And so I mean something with like American's law would technically grant that the teacher would already have access to that, so it would no longer be my like family's responsibility to make sure like textbooks are accurate and so forth. And then also just in general, like we have different units, you know, like we might have unit on like Japan, China, the Middle East, like South America, and so like people from those different countries or those different ethnicities, it's always like familiar to them because that's their culture, and like usually other people don't know as much, so they always speak out. And so just like it always like encourages them to speak out. Like when I hear about the Middle East or like in Syria, I always tell people like things that they don't know about. And so I guess in answering your question, like how will it affect me like in the future, like democratically or in like politics or speaking out? That's just basically what it does. It teaches me to like speak out to the class on things that they don't know of and like what I truly believe in.
Well, that's democracy. You know, every person has a voice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we do want to be a catalyst for saying you have permission to be included and to be self-expressed. And that's the backdrop we try to create. Did you want to add to that at all?
Well, I was still thinking about the aha moment that you asked about. And it goes along with making laws and the democracy of our country. But what I've noticed are little things. One of the photos that we used had a picture of a girl who was probably 8 or 10 years old, and it was at the time of the Industrial Revolution. My class was studying the westward expansion of the colonies, and we were talking about how industry affected the movement of people. And when we looked at that picture, we talked about the way the girl looked, her clothing, and as we did in one of our practice sessions, our training sessions, we gave thoughts, we imagined thoughts for her. And I think that my fourth graders were becoming aware that laws are made for a reason, but when they put an actual face and an experience to the picture, it gave an explanation that they wouldn't have had otherwise, like why we need those things and why we don't have that situation now.
Anybody else? Any teacher want to share an aha moment with us?
Don't want to get too personal about kids, but it always seemed like when we were using the Americans All, my experience as an educator was that students who typically were troubled and gave trouble suddenly became your best friend because they felt validated. The learning in the classroom was personal, and things that maybe might have been something that their family was proud of them for, they felt like they couldn't really share that at school. But because of the acceptance that they were seeing of these other things, then they felt more willing to reveal themselves. That bond then between the teacher and the student became so strong. It was often kind of an awkward moment when other faculty people would share the challenges that they were having with so-and-so, and you were able to say, well, gee, I don't have any trouble with him. He's like one of my star students.
Wow. That is such positive feedback. It's extremely helpful. The Americans All program integrates a component called appreciative learning, meaning that to appreciate means to grow. And what I'm hearing is that your students develop a greater appreciation for themselves, for their place in society, and for you. The relationship between the teacher and the student is something that we wanted to address in a subtle way. And I'm really happy to hear that that is in fact happening. Our time is running to a close. Any last thoughts that anyone would like to share before we bring it to closure? If not, I would like to share a quick story. My first experience with diversity, because I grew up in an all African American community, was when I went off to a summer camp, and I had a roommate who was white, and she was the daughter of a police officer. And I came home to the room one day, and there was an ambulance in front of the room, and they were taking her out on a stretcher, and this was at the end of the summer. And she had, in fact, attempted suicide. And she left a note, and the note said that she had been raised to hate people of color, to hate blacks. And as she thought of going home back into that environment, after having spent a summer becoming best friends with these people that she'd learned to hate, she couldn't reconcile that conflict. And at that moment, I realized how much of a life and death experience this issue of diversity can be in our society. And I made a commitment then that, like Dr. Wesley did, I would try to do something about this. And it changed me forever. And we solve these problems a little bit at a time. But we want you as educators to know that we believe that the role you play as educators is so profound, and that you can even help to change attitudes that are that deeply ingrained by the culture, by the society. And it's been very, very gratifying for us to hear your stories. Alan, would you like to say anything to close it?
There's almost no. This is kind of selfish, but it's incredible just sitting here knowing that the work that 70 to 100 people put into a program, and everything we thought made some sense actually does make some sense.
Right.
And so it's wonderful for us to hear that. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that it's not a 49,000 student district that gets the benefit of this kind of experience, but we want this available to 50 million kids. But we can do that by having you all help us by making sure all the schools are registered, either in your district, in your state, friends out of the state, so we can share that. This video will be real useful because it'll show people that we didn't make it up. That, as I said yesterday, real people actually do use these resources, and we don't force them on anyone. I mean, this is a voluntary situation, and nobody's grading you on how you use them. They're there, and we took the gamble that if we made them good, that you would use them. And it's really wonderful hearing your stories. Thanks.